My name is Juhi, and before anything else, I want you to understand one thing. I did not grow up as a dreamer. I grew up as a responsibility. Not mine, but everyone else's. I was the eldest daughter in a family that never had enough. Enough money, enough peace, enough stability, enough time to breathe. But somehow, there was always enough expectation from me. From the moment I learned to understand words, I also learned to understand pressure. If my younger brothers cried, I had to calm them. If my mother was tired, I had to help her. If my father was stressed, I had to stay quiet. I was not raised as a child. I was raised as support. There were mornings when I would wake up before sunrise, not because I wanted to, but because I had to help. Water containers needed filling. Food needed preparing. My brothers needed school uniforms ironed. And my mother, she needed someone to share the burden she never spoke about. I learned early that silence is also a duty in some homes. School was the only place where I felt slightly human. But even there, I was never free. Because while other children talked about cartoons and games, I talked about tuition fees, about notebooks, about whether I could afford a new pen. I remember once staring at a pencil that had become so small it could barely be held. I still used it, because replacing it felt like asking too much from life. But I was not weak. I told myself I was strong, because if I accepted weakness, everything would collapse. So I became the strong daughter, the one who never cried, the one who never complained, the one who always understood. But the truth was, I understood too much. As I grew older, responsibility did not decrease. It multiplied. My brothers were still studying. My parents were still struggling. And I became the bridge between survival and collapse. I started tutoring younger students. At first, it was just to earn small money for myself. But that small money never stayed with me. It always went somewhere else. A bill, a book, a medicine, a necessity I could not ignore. I stopped asking, why me? Because I already knew the answer. Because I was the eldest daughter. That label carried more weight than my name. Years passed like that. Slow, heavy, unforgiving. But something unexpected happened. I started becoming useful outside my home too. My students improved. My work was appreciated. My confidence grew in small, invisible steps. And one day, I got a real job. Not a dream job, but a job that paid. That was the moment everything changed, not for me, but for my family. For the first time, money entered the house through my hands. And suddenly, I was not just Juhi anymore. I was the one who earns, the one who can fix things, the one who should handle everything. If something broke, they came to me. If something was needed, they asked me. If something went wrong, they expected me to solve it. I never refused. Because I thought this was love. I thought this was family. I thought this is what daughters do. But I did not know something very important. When you become too useful, people stop seeing you as a person. They start seeing you as a system, a resource, a solution, a guarantee. Not someone with emotions. Slowly, I started noticing small changes. At first, it was nothing serious. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. Important topics were discussed quietly. My opinion was asked less, then ignored more. But I still believed it was normal, because I trusted them completely. There was one evening I still remember clearly. I asked about property papers. Just a simple question. Nothing aggressive, nothing suspicious. But the reaction was strange. My father avoided eye contact. My brothers became unusually calm, and someone said, "Don't worry about these things. You focus on your work." That sentence should have warned me, but I smiled and accepted it. Because I believed family cannot hide things from family. That was my biggest mistake. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. And I continued building a life that I thought belonged to all of us. I worked harder, earned more, supported more, sacrificed more. But I did not realize something was happening quietly behind my back. Something I could not see, something I did not want to see. Because sometimes, the people you trust the most don't break your heart suddenly. They erase you slowly, and I was being erased, without even noticing it. And this is the part where my life stopped feeling like a normal story and started feeling like something I could no longer control. After I got the job, everything in my life looked stable from the outside. To everyone else, I was the successful daughter, the one who made it. But success is a strange thing, because sometimes it does not free you. It traps you deeper. At first, I was proud that I could support my family, proud that I could reduce their suffering, proud that I was finally useful in a meaningful way. But slowly, that pride turned into routine, and routine turned into expectation, and expectation turned into obligation. Without me noticing, I started paying for everything: house expenses, education costs, medical bills, repairs, even small daily needs that no one talked about anymore, because they assumed I would handle them. And I did, every time, without question. But something strange began happening. I started feeling like an outsider in my own home, not physically, but emotionally. There was a distance I could not explain, a silence that followed me into rooms, a pause in conversations when I arrived, a change in tone when I asked questions. At first, I ignored it, because I trusted my family more than I trusted my instincts, and that trust was slowly being used against me. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. It was raining heavily outside, the kind of rain that makes everything look honest, clean, transparent. But inside my house, nothing was transparent anymore. I entered quietly. No one noticed me at first. My father was in the living room. My brothers were sitting near him. There were papers on the table, a lot of papers, and something in their expressions made me stop. Not fear, not guilt. Something worse, control. I asked softly, "What are these documents?" The room changed instantly, like someone had switched off a sound. My father looked at me for a moment, then looked away. My older brother smiled slightly, not a warm smile, a defensive one, and said, "Nothing important, just routine things." Routine things. That sentence should have meant nothing. But it stayed in my mind. I walked closer. My eyes fell on one paper, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Property details, land documents, ownership transfers. My name was not there. At first, my brain refused to process it. It felt like reading something in a language I almost understood, but not fully, so I blinked, read again, and again. But the truth did not change. My name was missing. I looked at my father. "Why is my name not in this?" My voice was calm, too calm, because inside, something had already started breaking. My father sighed, a long, tired sigh, and said, "Juhi, don't start this now. It's complicated, complicated." That word again, used when truth becomes inconvenient. I turned to my brothers. They avoided my eyes. That was the moment I understood something very clearly. This was not confusion. This was not misunderstanding. This was preparation. My hands started shaking, but I still asked, "Why am I not informed about this?" Silence. A heavy silence. The kind that does not come from lack of words, but from planned avoidance. Finally, my elder brother said, "You don't need to worry about property matters. You already have enough stress, enough stress." As if my entire life was just stress management for them. I remember laughing slightly, not because it was funny, but because my mind was refusing reality. That laugh lasted only a second, then disappeared. That night, I did not sleep. I kept thinking, maybe I misunderstood, maybe I overreacted, maybe I was not seeing the full picture. Because that is what trust does. It makes you doubt yourself before you doubt others. But the next morning, I did something I had never done before. I checked carefully every document I could find, every file, every record, every paper I was allowed to see. And then I started noticing patterns, too many patterns, too consistent, too deliberate. Ownership changes, missing signatures I never saw, dates I was never informed about, decisions made when I was not present. It was a system, and at the center of that system was my family. My hands felt cold, not from fear, but from realization. Because now I understood something painful. This was not something happening recently. This had been happening for years. Slowly, quietly, carefully, I closed the file. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like the eldest daughter. I felt like someone who had been left outside her own life. And by this point in my life, I was no longer confused. I was no longer guessing. I was no longer hoping. I was slowly beginning to understand the truth. But understanding the truth does not always set you free. Sometimes it destroys you quietly. After I saw the documents, something inside me changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. I stopped smiling the same way. I stopped talking freely. I stopped trusting easily. But I did not confront them again immediately, Because I needed time. Time to understand. Time to confirm. Time to prepare myself for a reality I was not ready to accept. And during that time, something else began happening. Silence. Not ordinary silence, a controlled silence. Conversations changed when I entered rooms. Topics ended abruptly. Laughter became softer. Eyes avoided mine longer than before. It felt like I was inside a house that was still functioning, but no longer including me in its decisions. I continued my responsibilities, because that was my habit. Even when I was breaking inside, I still showed up. I still paid bills. I still supported everyone. I still behaved like nothing was wrong. Because that is what I had been trained to do. Ignore yourself, serve others, stay strong. But inside me, something was collapsing slowly, like a structure being dismantled one piece at a time. Without noise, without warning, without permission. One night I overheard a conversation. I was not supposed to. I was walking past the hallway when I heard my name. I stopped. I did not enter. I listened. My brother said, "She is starting to ask too many questions." A pause. Then my father replied, "She will adjust, she always does." Adjust, that word hit differently, because it meant they expected my silence to continue. I stood there in the dark hallway for a long time, not moving, not reacting, just listening to my own life being discussed without me in it. That night, I did not sleep again. But this time, it was not confusion keeping me awake, it was clarity. The next morning, I noticed something even more painful. No one asked me how I was, not even once. Not even out of habit. It was as if my emotional existence had been quietly removed. I tried to talk normally. I tried to act normal. But something had shifted permanently. Even my voice felt heavier. Even my presence felt smaller. Days turned into weeks, and during those weeks, I slowly became invisible in my own home. Not physically, but emotionally. I was there, but I was not included. Important discussions happened without me. Financial decisions were made without informing me. Plans were created without asking me. And whenever I tried to enter those conversations, I was gently redirected. Don't worry about it. You focus on your work. You already do too much. Too much. As if my effort had become an inconvenience. And the most painful part? I still kept doing everything, because I believed stopping would make things worse. Because I believed speaking would break the family. Because I believed silence was protection. But silence was not protection. It was permission. One evening, I sat alone in my room. I looked at my hands, hands that worked, hands that supported, hands that built stability for others. And I asked myself something I had never asked before. What do I have that is truly mine? The answer came slowly, almost painfully. Nothing. Everything I had built was for others. Everything I had earned was used by others. Everything I had sacrificed was remembered by no one. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I was not just being ignored. I was being replaced, not as a daughter, but as a role they needed me to play, until I became unnecessary. That night, I cried silently, not because I was weak, but because I finally understood the cost of being the strong one. No one checks on strong people. No one asks if they are okay. No one notices when they start disappearing. And I was disappearing quietly, completely, finally collapsed in front of my eyes. Not emotionally first, not mentally first, but legally. For a long time, I kept telling myself that maybe I misunderstood everything. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe my fear was louder than reality. But reality does not wait for readiness. It arrives when it wants, and it destroys whatever illusion is left. That morning started like any other morning. The house was normal on the surface, breakfast being prepared, people moving around, conversations happening in fragments. But I felt something different inside me, a heaviness I could not explain, like something was about to end. I decided to go to the land registry office, not because I was fully sure, but because I needed answers that no one in my house was willing to give. I told no one. I just left. The journey felt longer than usual. Every stop felt louder. Every minute felt heavier. And my mind kept repeating one question. What if I am right? But I did not allow myself to complete that thought, because I was afraid of the answer. When I reached the office, everything looked ordinary. People waiting, files being handled, stamps being pressed, normal life continuing, while my life was about to break. I approached the counter. My hands were shaking slightly. I asked for information about my family property records. The clerk asked for details. I provided everything I knew, and then I waited. What happened next changed everything. The clerk pulled out files, one after another, slowly, carefully, and each file felt like a strike against my chest. Then I saw it, not all at once, but piece by piece: property transfers, ownership changes, legal documents, dates I was never told about, signatures I never witnessed, decisions I was never part of. And then the final confirmation came. Everything had already been transferred, not recently, but over years, quietly, systematically, legally. My name appeared nowhere in ownership, not on land, not on property, not on anything meaningful. I asked again. My voice barely came out. "Are you sure this is complete?" The clerk nodded. That simple nod destroyed everything. I stepped back. My legs felt weak, but I did not fall, not because I was strong, but because my body had not yet accepted reality. I walked outside the building, and for the first time, the world felt unfamiliar, the air felt different, the ground felt unstable. Even light felt heavier. I sat on a bench outside. People were walking past me. Cars were moving. Life was continuing. But mine had stopped. I finally understood something painful. I was not part of the story I had been building. I was part of the effort behind someone else's story. Everything I earned, everything I sacrificed, everything I believed I was building had been redirected silently, away from me, without my knowledge, without my consent. And the worst part was not the loss. It was the realization that the loss had been planned long ago. I remembered every moment. Every time I was told, "Don't worry," every time I was redirected, every time I was silenced, every time I trusted. It was not sudden betrayal. It was structured betrayal, slow, silent, intentional. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not anger, not sadness, not confusion, but emptiness. Because when truth is too heavy, the mind stops reacting. That night, I returned home. No one noticed anything immediately, and that was the most painful part, because my entire world had ended, and theirs had not even paused. I stood in my room for a long time, looking at everything I had done, everything I had given, everything I had built, and for the first time, I did not feel like I belonged there. Not because everything became perfect, but because I finally stopped waiting for it to become perfect. After I returned home that night from the land registry office, something inside me had gone quiet, not peaceful, not healed, just quiet. The kind of silence that comes when the mind accepts something the heart has been refusing for years. No one in the house asked me what happened. No one noticed the difference in my face. No one sensed the collapse that had already taken place inside me. And that told me everything I needed to know. I was not part of their awareness. I was part of their system. That night, I sat alone in my room. I looked at the walls I had lived in for years. I looked at the space I had worked for. I looked at the life I had built for everyone else. And I asked myself one question: where do I exist in all of this? There was no answer, because I did not exist there anymore. Not as a person, only as a function. The next morning, everything looked normal again. But I was no longer the same. Something had shifted permanently inside me. I moved differently. I spoke less. I observed more. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting. I was thinking. I started noticing things I had ignored for years. How every decision in the house had always moved in one direction, away from me. How every promise had slowly dissolved into convenience. How every sacrifice I made had become invisible the moment it was completed. And the most painful realization came quietly. I was never part of the plan. I was only part of the execution. Days passed like that, silent, heavy, strange, until one morning I made a decision that even I was not fully ready for. I would leave, not to punish anyone, not to create drama, not to seek revenge, but to finally stop disappearing inside my own life. I packed my things slowly. No one stopped me. No one asked questions, and that silence confirmed what I already knew. I was already gone in their eyes long before I physically left. When I stepped out of that house, I did not cry, not because I was strong, but because crying felt unnecessary at that point. Everything had already been said without words. Everything had already ended without goodbye. The world outside felt different, not kinder, not easier, but open. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without permission. I found a small place to stay. I started rebuilding slowly, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one version of myself at a time. There were nights when the pain returned, not loudly, but quietly. Memories of sacrifice. Memories of betrayal. Memories of love that was conditional without ever being called conditional. But something new also began to grow inside me. Clarity, not hope, not trust, but clarity. The understanding that love should not erase you, family should not replace you, and sacrifice should not make you invisible. I started working again, but this time for myself. I saved money for my future, not others' comfort. I learned to say no without guilt. I learned to sit alone without feeling abandoned. I learned that silence is not always strength. Sometimes it is survival. Months later, I heard news about my old home. Life continued there as if nothing had changed, as if I had never left. And strangely, that no longer hurt me, because I finally understood something very important. I was never meant to be remembered there. I was meant to escape from there. One evening, I stood in front of a mirror. I saw myself properly for the first time in years. Not as a daughter, not as a provider, not as a replacement for responsibility, but as a person, just a person. And I whispered to myself, you are allowed to exist for yourself. And that was the beginning of my real life. Not the life I was forced into, not the life I built for others, but the life I finally chose. My name is Juhi, and I lost everything I thought I had. But in losing it, I found myself.